Elijah stood before King Ahab, a ruler who had turned his heart away from God. With unwavering faith, the prophet declared a drought over the land. No rain, no dew, nothing. The skies would close, and the land would wither. Then, just as swiftly as he arrived, Elijah disappeared, leaving Ahab stunned by the weight of his words. God led Elijah into the wilderness, away from the king's wrath. There, beside the brook of Cherith, he found his refuge. The Lord's provision was miraculous. Ravens, unclean birds by nature, delivered food to him each day. As the days stretched into months, Elijah waited, trusting in the God who had never failed him. As the brook dried up, Elijah journeyed to Zarephath, where he found a widow gathering sticks. She was preparing one final meal for herself and her son before famine would claim them. But Elijah's words carried hope. "Make me a small cake first, and your flour and oil will never run dry." She obeyed, and just as the prophet said, her home never lacked provision, a testimony of God's faithfulness. But sorrow soon visited the widow's home. Her son fell sick and died. In her grief, she cried out, questioning the prophet's presence. Elijah carried the boy to his room, stretched himself over him 3 times, and pleaded with the Lord for life to return. And suddenly, breath filled the child's lungs. The widow, overwhelmed, declared, "Now I know you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." After years of drought, the time had come for Elijah to return. He confronted Ahab, accusing him of leading Israel into idolatry. The land was dying. The people had turned to Baal, and God's judgment was upon them. Elijah called for a test, one that would settle once and for all who was the true God. On Mount Carmel, Elijah faced 450 prophets of Baal. They danced and cried out to their God, but no fire came. Elijah stepped forward, rebuilt the Lord's altar, and soaked it with water. Then he prayed, and in an instant, fire rained from heaven, consuming the sacrifice. The people fell on their faces, crying, "The Lord, He is God." Judgment followed, and Baal's prophets were no more. With the false prophets gone, Elijah turned his eyes to the heavens. He prayed for rain, and on the 7th time, his servant saw it, a small cloud, rising like a hand. It grew, darkened, and soon the sky opened, drenching the thirsty earth. Ahab fled, but Elijah, strengthened by the Lord, ran ahead of the king's chariot, a sign of divine power and urgency. Jezebel, enraged by the loss of her prophets, swore vengeance on Elijah. The mighty prophet who had stood before kings now fled into the wilderness, weary, alone, and afraid. Elijah found shelter in a cave, expecting God to speak in power. A great wind tore through the mountains, but God was not in the wind. Elijah's mission was complete. As he walked with Elisha, suddenly a chariot of fire appeared, separating them. In an instant, Elijah was lifted into the heavens, never to taste death. His mantle fell to Elisha, a sign that the work of God would continue. And so the prophet who stood before kings, who called fire from heaven, and who walked in the presence of God, was taken into glory.